All right. I want to start off this presentation by stating that you cannot change the conditions of the community that you are in, and you cannot change the conditions that the world is already in. Which means that if the world is inherently harmful, you cannot change that. If the world is inherently good in another universe, you also can change that in another universe. And it leads me to this discussion as to why we need to understand the necessity of learning how to rage bait and status quo. Because I firmly believe that given the current features of the world that we live in, rage bait should be an act of self-defense in order for you to show your intellect, but also to show the way that you are unfazed in terms of certain situations and you ought to do things or do acts that can pay yourself back. So this is what this discussion is going to be about. So I want to come in by stating that the world is inherently harmful, and there are three reasons to this. Firstly, kindness is dead. This looks like how people have questioned acts of kindness, like, for example, making sure a senior citizen is able to walk down the pedestrian lane, or basically sharing acts of kindness in TikTok, where oftentimes people just tend to question these types of acts. And it often trickles down to how we act today because sometimes we feel coerced, or sometimes we have to conform into these types of standards that are already so globalized. And it eventually leads to us stating that kindness is dead. Secondly, people have become more ignorant of others' conditions. This looks like, for example, in your workplace where your bosses probably don't care about the predicaments that you are in, family-wise or even financial-wise, and they only care about you as someone who is able to contribute to the GDP or being able to contribute in the way that your work is able to flow. And this often leads to a lot of problems, especially in the cognitive of a lot of individuals, where people have just instilled a work mentality and they have tend to compromise their own dignity and especially in the way that they're able to live their lives. But also, thirdly, attitudes of today are considered normal. What do these attitudes look like? The attitude of being able to crash out, the attitude of being able to shame someone, and where oftentimes kindness is often downplayed. These are types of attitudes that we consider are normal and we tend to tolerate. And it often leads to us stating that rage bait is actually the only answer to the current conditions of status quo. I perhaps would say that rage bait is the only way for you to defend yourself. Rage bait is the only way for you to make sure that you are known, given that there are no other ways in order for you to become like recognized in some sort of way, which is why I'm able to do this, especially in debates. I'm able to do these in conversations, but also I'd want to take note that my way of rage baiting is not one that involves ad hominems. This often includes a lot of ways where you're able to get into the minds of your opponent in a way that is considered ethical in my eyes. So before we get to how I tend to rage bait, let's first understand what is rage bait in and of itself. So, from Urban Dictionary, rage bait or rage baited means that you ought to say something that will obviously make someone mad just to get the reaction, which means then that you ought to say something so bad in order for you to like make sure that your opponent shows some sense of anger or show some sense of being pissed off regarding the statement that you just said. And I'm here going to talk to you to state that this is actually that's going to be essential in the world that we live in right now. So, how to be an effective rage baiter? And I want to point out these are my own strategies, and I think others are able to do the same, and I think you should be able to do too, in order for you to be a really good rage baiter, given that there's no other choice in status quo in order for you to defend yourself. So yeah, first, know your opponent's interests. When we mean by interests, what does it look like? It can go by asking three questions. Firstly, what music do they like? Secondly, what video games do they like? But also, thirdly, are they a yapatron or do they endlessly talk about some things that are part of their interests where oftentimes it already starts to make you mad or sometimes they talk about it too much in order for you to feel some sense of anger or resentment towards this certain individual? Questions like these can help you set the frame on how you wish to rage bait someone. Because oftentimes, these opponents or these individuals often stick into these types of interests, and it is only you who is able to set the groundwork into how you're able to crush these types of interests by creating contrasting statements, which leads me to my next slide. To state contrasting claims. Now is an example of do they like Kendrick Lamar? The way that you're able to rage bait a Kendrick Lamar fan goes two ways. Firstly, is that you're able to rage bait them by stating that Drake is better. Perhaps you can say that God's plan was way better, was like way better than the songs that Kendrick was able to make last year, or like, mm, a lot of songs like started from the bottom now here is way better than like the album with like N95 from Kendrick. But also secondly, you can state like really outright wrong statements in order for you to get into the mind of your opponents. By for example, for a Kendrick fan, you're able to rage bait them by stating that Kendrick had ghostwriters, which is something that's not true. But if you're able to like put this in a way that can actually make someone mad, then that means you're able to rage bait them in a really effective manner. Next then, do they like Tottenham Hotspur? So for background, this is an English football club which only won one trophy in the past like 10, 15 years. So the way that you're able to rage bait a Tottenham Hotspur fan is in two ways. Firstly, you're able to rage bait them by stating that Arsenal, which is like their main opponent in the Premier League, is the best team currently in status quo. Oftentimes, they know that this is already something that is like outright true. They just don't wish to like concede to it. But the way that you're able to annoy these types of fans is by stating these things in a repeating manner, which means then that in first they might not be able to get rage baited. Meaning that when you're going to say it like 5 times, or when you're going to say it at like in a repetitive manner, that's where you're gonna say like, okay, pack it up, bro. You're done. I'm actually getting mad. But also, secondly, you can rage bait them by stating that they won't win certain things. Like, for example, they won't win a trophy ever again after they won recently. And these are things that you can do in a repeatedly manner. Also, like in the Kendrick thing, there are some people that will become unfazed, but if you're going to state more things, more than just these examples, or you state these things in a repetitive manner, that's where you're able to like make them mad. Next. Do they like monchichis? So this is concerning my debate partner. The way that you're able to rage bait someone who likes monchichis is by rage baiting them by stating that monchichis look ugly. And they basically just look like cutified koalas, which doesn't make them any better. That in and of itself can perhaps rage bait an individual who really likes monchichis and makes it their personality. But also, secondly, you can say that Hironos are just way better, man. Monchichis are way too overpriced. It's only available in certain areas. It's not something that is inclusive as opposed to Hironos and how pop marts are able to function in status quo. Things like these can help you rage bait someone who likes monchichis. Just again, they might become unfazed at first, but if you say it in a repeated manner, they might be able to show some signs of being rage baited, which means that you're able to do your job well. Though, just as I stated to you, there are some points and you have to determine if you need to do it repeatedly, especially when your opponent is unfazed. So you have to state these things repeatedly if they are unbothered. Or also you can go into other ways, like for example, saying outright wrong or saying outright like somewhat concerning things that aren't like really offensive, like in face value, but something that can like really catch the minds of these individuals, like something that can make them remember you in the worst ways possible. That is how you are able to rage bait them. I myself cannot give examples currently, but let's see. Okay, and this is most important. When you want to rage bait someone, you should not include any ad hominems in the way that you're able to rage bait them. Because I personally think that this is not proper rage bait. You're just a really bad person if you're going to state things that is going to harm a physical appearance, their mental state. These are things that aren't part of the way that I wish to practice rage bait and status quo. I consider myself a masturbator because I'm a really good guy when it comes to rage baiting, but I never use any ad hominems to make a point straight or to make someone really mad because that is not how rage bait works. And I want to really stress this out. If you're going to do this, that is not rage bait. That is beyond my control. And this is beyond the things that I'm making you learn currently. Take note that you must only rage bait for self defense or rage bait in the hopes that you will no longer be bothered. So, in terms of like individuals talking about their music, talking about their games, if they yap about it a lot, then that is where you're able to rage bait. Or when they try to annoy you so deliberately, then reciprocate the rage bait back. Because kindness is dead. And being nonchalant sometimes doesn't work. So pick your poison, I guess. That's what I can say. Okay, here's a scenario. So, someone's trash talking you in a video game, like for example, you got solo killed by your opposing laner in League of Legends. And the problem is that you do not know them personally, which means that you have no opening whatsoever to understand what their interests are. And the way that you're able to circumnavigate around this is simply by annoying them by stating things repeatedly. Like the way I would say this is by stating that I am unbothered. Like I just keep spamming I am unbothered for like the entire duration of the game every time they trash talk. But also secondly, it can look like spamming emotes, spamming recall in order for them to be rage baited because oftentimes that's a sign of like quote unquote BM in these types of games. And also thirdly, I used to do this before, like in 2023, 2024. Whenever I'd get clocked, I'd say like, bro, I'm only 12. Why are you trash talking me? And I'd keep on spamming that in order for me to get into their minds because oftentimes they'd say, okay, okay, we get it, you're 12. Stop chatting me. And that means that your rage bait actually works, especially to someone who their interest is something that you are unaware of and you do not have any capability to know of. So yeah, that's how you're able to rage bait. Um, it's a really comprehensive lecture. Thank you for listening.